Well, good morning. According to my watch, it is 11. So this is supposed to start at 11. Let's start, if you agree. My name is Fernando Jorge Cardoso. I am a professor here at the Autonomous University in Lisbon. I'm an economist. I work at the International Relations Department. So my focus is more on geoeconomics. But anyway, I will moderate this session, which name is Emerging Powers in Multipolar Regionalism. I was very, very intrigued about how Afghanistan and Angola are emerging powers, but we will see. My idea, as we are not all of us present here, and I don't see that anybody is online, my idea was to start from the more general to the more particular, and I will keep this, if you don't mind. This meaning that the three of the speakers are here, and from these three speakers, one Mujib will speak about Afghanistan. From Melbourne, you have come from very far.
Very far.
Gosh. And then I see that we have also Vignesh Guruswamy.
Yes.
Thank you. So he will speak about ASEAN. Can I ask you, Manipal Academy is where?
It's in the south of India.
In the south of India.
Close to Goa.
We have come a little closer, but also far away from here. Welcome. And of course, we will have here, and it didn't come so far, as David Silva Ferreira, that will speak about UN and practicing peace through geopolitics. So my point is that I will start with David, because I believe this is the more general theme that we have between you, the speakers, and then I will go to ASEAN, and then I will listen to you telling us how Afghanistan is an emerging power. I know that you are not speaking about that, but I'm joking. Welcome for you all. Welcome for you also. So David Silva Ferreira and Sandra Fernandes, she's not there. She's a professor at the university in one of our northern public universities, in the University of Minho, the Center of Research in Political Science. She's the director. And David Silva Ferreira, he works in the Center of International Studies of Lisbon University, the Lisbon Institute University, the University of Lisbon, ISCTE. So David, we will speak by both of you, and the team will be practicing peace through geopolitics. And before this, there is a UN, that I believe it's United Nations, no?
No, it's just unpractice and practice. So it's just, yeah.
I was joking.
Oh, okay.
because the N is in capital letters, that's why.
Oh, okay.
So practicing and practicing peace through geopolitics, just for the sake of for us to have time to discuss a little, I will ask you not to go to try to stay between 10 and 15 minutes, please. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Come on.
All right. Good morning, all. So I'll be presenting a paper titled Unpracticed Peace Through Geopolitics. My co-author, Professor Sandra Fernandes, unfortunately couldn't be here, so I'll be delivering the presentation on her part as well. So this is a brief overview of my presentation, but due to time constraints, maybe I'll just move along. So at the heart of this paper is the idea that geopolitics is just something essential for understanding societal development, which depends on security. And a core argument will be that individuals and not states should be at the heart of international politics, where interests and identities are transformed. I will elaborate on that as we go on. So, geopolitics can function both as a means to practice peace and to unpractice peace. And that depends on how the security dilemma is utilized as an analytical approach to the effect. So we have two key geopolitical outlooks. We have the fatalist view, whereby humans are trapped in cycles of suffering driven by the security dilemma. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have the transcendentalist view, whereby global society can rise above the dangers of the past. So, well, the security dilemma is a central concept across the major IR paradigms. It's based on the anarchic, a view of the international system as anarchic. So states rely on self-help. They have fear of attack, so that fuels power accumulation. And then as a result, such steps can create insecurity in another state, which then takes steps that can increase the fear of attack even further in the first state. So this is an important point. Security dilemma can trigger a spiral of escalating hostility, but that does not mean that all spirals constitute genuine security dilemmas. For instance, the case of colonial powers' expansionist ambitions. And there are two key aspects of the security dilemma. One of them is the idea that the uncertainty is just an issue that cannot be resolved because we cannot know the motives of the other party. And that, of course, generates fear, and taking steps to address that fear, that uncertainty, that could ultimately lead to self-destruction if intentions are misinterpreted. But the security dilemma can be a useful tool for decision makers, as long as, and this is called the security dilemma sensibility, as long as one recognizes fear in others' behavior, recognizes how one's own actions provoke fear. And while this is not always sustainable, sensibility can succeed if actors make an effort, they take risks, if they strive for cooperation. So, the security dilemma is a direct consequence of the realist view of the anarchic international system, which leads states to prioritize their security. This is evident currently in the dynamics of great power rivalries, such as the tensions between the US, China, and Russia, where geopolitical interests and military capabilities heightens the sense of insecurity among states. There's some research trend that I want to address. So obviously there is a realist dominance in international relations. However, that has progressively started to change, at least to a certain extent. While security studies are privileged over peace studies, an important thing to retain is that there's also an emphasis on negative peace, meaning the absence of violence, over positive peace, which entails human realization. This has been studied by Galtung, who strived to expand the concept of peace. He saw it as the negation of all forms of violence, not just direct violence, but also structural violence. He saw inequality as a core structural form of violence, and he emphasized that peace requires social justice. So not just the absence of direct violence, but also the absence of structural violence. Well, during the Cold War, peace research continued to focus on negative peace, but some scholarship was produced that focused on the concept of interdependence, which influenced IR thinking on forced and state behavior, and basically how states could look differently at the use of force and how it could be used to achieve political means due to increased interdependence among states. So we have here a spectrum between fatalism and transcendence. In this case, I'm talking about mitigation politics, policies that fall somewhere in the middle. Essentially, they're based on rational egoism. So often, we can think, for instance, about trade agreements. They can shape how states think about the use of violence, but sometimes they're celebrated by political leaders who get replaced, and because you're based on self interest, everything can fall apart very quickly. There's no embedded trust between states. With the end of the Cold War, there was a rise of studies in critical social science, and there was a number of studies that denoted greater optimism about the possibility of transcending the security dilemma. So we have basically two approaches to transcendentalism. The first one is living with uncertainty. The constructivist argument emphasizes that state action is influenced by interests and identities formed through interaction of geography and ideas. Cooperation and peace becomes possible when states see themselves and others differently within specific spaces. And Adler and Barnett built on that logic. They advanced the concept of security communities. For instance, Western Europe, where shared values, institutions, identity, etc., basically allowed fear and weapons to be replaced by cooperation and trust. So basically, divisions and suspicions are not necessarily inevitable. This fits, of course, transcendentalist logic. However, embedded trust cannot be built solely between political leaders, even though they play an important role. It has to happen also at intersocietal level. Because identities are socially constructed, it's possible that they can involve your enemy to trust. And as mutual positive feelings are built between societies, war and violence becomes unthinkable as an instrument of policy. So the peaceful uncertainty path basically entails norms, institutions, interdependence, multi-level societal interactions, and a point that I'd like to make that this still means living with uncertainty. So basically, on the one hand, we're still talking about peace as just the absence of war. And secondly, the existential condition of unresolvable uncertainty, it still remains in place. What happens is that if one ceases to be afraid of fear itself, then it's possible to transcend the trap of the security dilemma, even if one cannot escape it. And that's how we arrive at the second transcendentalist perspective. So space can be manipulated in the name of peace. It can be shaped and reshaped through decisions, through narratives that can either support positive peace or reinforce existing inequalities. And critical geopolitics challenge classical views of space. They basically, critical theorists argue that peace should be seen as contextual and embedded in power relations. They question what kind of peace are we talking about, how is it realized, and stress that peace means different things at different scales to different groups, different times and places. So critical scholars also denounce the preference for stasis over change, meaning that they criticize how sometimes order was considered preferable to social injustice if it means that one could seize direct violence. Critical scholars, on the other hand, argue that short or medium-term peace, often victor-imposed, was unfair. It risked new conflicts, and one needed to really address the issue of structural violence. They criticize liberal peace. They argue that it's basically just served the neoliberal empire and reflected Western privileges. So effective peace building ought to reflect local understandings of peace and justice, to not reproduce patterns of domination and colonial legacies, which are rooted in structures of the international system that sustain structural violence. So they advocated for a broader vision of peace, one that transforms social structures to promote nonviolence and justice rather than simply ending conflict or imposing order to delay it. They aimed at structural transformation, so the end of the state system, of capitalism, of the patriarchy, of white supremacy, governments, etc. Basically, each IR scholar would focus on one issue or two. And the security dilemma was actually seen as a byproduct of the international structures, and it was very rarely the focus of critical scholarship. Because from their perspective, as long as the structure was transformed, then the conditions that generated fear, uncertainty, inequality would be eliminated. And by replacing structural violence with trust, which would be made possible by structural transformation, it would be possible to build lasting positive peace. So, very briefly, because I don't know if I have a lot more time, but this is basically a graphical abstract. We can see on the one hand fatalism and the idea that space is a battleground for power competition, and on the other hand, we have transcendentalism. On the one hand, one could build trust through cooperation, accept that uncertainty is unavoidable, and look at institutions and norms as a way to reduce arms races and conflicts. Basically, the geopolitical space could be seen as a domain for collaborative interaction. On the other hand, one could seek peace and justice through emancipation and look to build universal positive peace. This is based on the view that space is embedded in power relations, so it is through structural transformation that one can resolve the security dilemma and make peace and justice sustainable. So, just a few more ideas. Cooperation based solely on rational egoism is probably, it is unsustainable. We're talking about ways in which the security dilemma is just mitigated, not transcended. Identities and interests can evolve beyond anarchy-driven conflict. That's a core argument that we're trying to make. Interdependence can prevent conflict, but ultimately it is a true embedded trust that requires deeper societal engagement, in which leaders can incentivize that one can transcend the security dilemma. And while security communities can remove conflict as an option, we still need to take into account that security communities can still perpetuate direct or structural violence either internally or globally, which is the case because the deep structure of international politics are not yet transformed. So critical geopolitics asked how, what, where, how, and for whom peace is practiced. They stressed that peace and justice are inseparable, that social justice shouldn't be tolerated just to maintain order, and that power dynamics shape peace practices. So adjustment is needed so that peace can serve local needs. So, yeah, I guess I can just I just really wanted to mention that there's a spectrum, right? So we can go from inevitable fatalism to mitigation, then transcendence, and then eventually form a transcendence that escapes it. And just to finish, humanity could have done better in the past and may do better in the future. The security dilemma is a useful tool to understand state behavior. Kill or be killed persists as an option for the powerful, but that is not to say that cooperation cannot be possible when actors trapped in fear choose to pursue and build upon it. So thank you.
Thank you, David. May I ask you a personal question?
Yeah, sure.
Are you religious? Do you
I
have?
mean, not pretty. Why?
Because you use two very strong words in religion. One is fatalism and the other is transcendentalism, just to explain reality. That's very interesting.
No, there was actually
I'm an
based.
atheist, so that's why.
Oh,
I
okay.
asked.
Yeah, they are. Thank you. Okay, actually, I'm glad you read that because I didn't have that impression because in the literature I did find those terms.
No, I was joking, my friend.
Yeah.
Just to pass the words
No,
to the other.
no, but that's so fine. Yeah, they are strong words.
Fatalism on one side, transcendentalism on the other.
Yeah,
They're
we are-
very strong religious
Yeah,
words.
yeah, they are.
They are.
I didn't. That actually didn't. It's not something I thought about. But we are also talking about very serious issues. So I think that I think it's okay to be a little.
I'm very happy that we are very optimistic. Anyway, thank you. So now I will ask Vignesh Ram Guruswamy from the Manipal Academy of Higher Education in India, and he will speak about ASEAN and regional autonomy in an era of weaponized interdependence, etc. It is a very long title, my friend. So I will leave it to you. Thank you very much for being with us, and please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I agree with you. The title is quite long. I was contemplating this morning on shortening it and saying that I changed it, but it wouldn't go with the program. So let me thank CESRAN and the university here for having me. And a little bit about why I chose this topic. I mean, I work on Indo-Pacific and on ASEAN and on geopolitics of the region. The idea of regional autonomy and regionalism, especially in a region like Southeast Asia, which was in the Cold War quite divided and economically gained momentum, the idea of regional autonomy and centrality is very key. Starting from the keynote, what I did observe is that everybody agrees that there is a trade difference or trade war, if we can call it, between the United States and China. And no other region where it's manifested so strongly as in Southeast Asia, right? So because these economies are very interdependent on security and economic matters on either of them or split between both of them. So it makes very interesting for a case to pick the ASEAN countries to look at. First and foremost, pardon me for cutting off half of the map because I can't show a wrong map of my country, so I had to crop it a little bit. But this is from the publicly available sources. So what is exactly the Indo-Pacific, which we talk about today? So as you can see that we are very accustomed to hearing about the term Asia-Pacific. In literature, Asia-Pacific emerged as an economic region consisting of the countries which are shaded in orange over here, as you can see. And today what we talk about the Indo-Pacific is not one cohesive region, but I can break it down into three different aspects. One is, of course, the geographical Indo-Pacific, which is showcased here with the dotted lines, as you can see on the outline of this map, in red in color, stretching from the west coast of the United States right up till the east coast of Africa. And nearly it's defined by all of these four countries, mainly which talk about the Indo-Pacific in today's day and age, which is India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. And of course, certain European countries also have an Indo-Pacific strategy and outlook in which they define this region. Namely, the European Union has one, Germany has one, and France has one strategy. Of course, the other contra region is the economic Indo-Pacific region, right? So what is the difference between, if you say, the geographical and the economic? Is that the geographical context plus the economic construct, which we talk about, which is floated around by what we today know as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or the IPEF, which goes contrary to the China-centric idea of the Asia-Pacific. And then, of course, there is the geopolitical Indo-Pacific region. So what exactly is the geopolitical Indo-Pacific region? It's defined by an economic and structural cooperation between these particular countries. And the structure is security-wise centered on what we term as the Quad, the four countries which have defined the Indo-Pacific, that is India, the United States, Japan, and Australia, and also the regional capacity building strategies which they implement, and also the supply chain diversifications. So put together, the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific is defined by these particular actors. So over a point of time, if we see historically, the premise of peace in this particular Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific region was largely defined on a stable trading relationship which was there between major economies, which is the ASEAN countries, with the major powers, the United States and China, when there was much of a stability and China was growing as a power, right? And of course, all of this was centrally premised on the idea of the security umbrella of the United States, which it was providing in the Asia-Pacific region through its alliance systems. Now, of course, when we talk about multilateralism, it was characterized largely by regional institutions and organizations with a standardized set of norms of behavior, which meant it was centric on ASEAN and ASEAN centrality and the norms. And these norms were diffused to other partners through the relationships which they had with the organizational structures. And of course, with what we term as the era of the rise of China or the Asian century, we see that there is a slow change in the status quo. This starts with the early part of 2000s when the Chinese openly write in the Foreign Policy magazine about China's peaceful rise, right? So when we talk about China's peaceful rise, it has to be countered by someone or something, which comes out with the United States talking about rebalancing to the Asia Pacific. And of course, then comes the concept of the Indo-Pacific. And then, of course, today we see that there is a confrontation and there is a China threat in this particular region. So where is ASEAN in the midst of this? And it is worthwhile exploring where we look at ASEAN and its normative culture. So what exactly is its normative culture? Like any other regional organization or regional grouping, it has a certain set of norms of behavior based on which it functions, right? So every single time, if you ask someone from Europe, they would say that it's an ineffective organization which doesn't work. To some extent it does, some extent it doesn't. I don't belong to either of the regions, so I can very safely say this. And when we look at ASEAN, the set of norms which are codified within the organizational framework relies on these particular issues. One, of course, is consensus-based decision-making, which means that until a decision is arrived on, there is no outcome, right? There is no voting. That is the final thing. Informal diplomacy, non-interference, and also respect of sovereignty and what we term as ASEAN centrality. And these norms of behavior are codified through something known as the ASEAN Charter. Now, the idea of ASEAN centrality, which makes regional autonomy a very important aspect, becomes very key focus over here. So the notion here is that ASEAN as an organization should be in the driver's seat of most of the regional multilateral initiatives. And most organizations emerged in the Asia Pacific with a central component of ASEAN's functioning, which means the ASEAN Plus frameworks. We see that whenever there is an ASEAN summit, we have the ASEAN Plus 1, Plus 3, Plus 5, Plus 6. And then there is the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, the East Asia Summit, and then the final Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which was built on this particular structure. So the preference for normative acceptance of the organization's functioning was centered on this premise of peace of ASEAN's non-problematic stance with other countries. So just to give you an example, if you take the ASEAN Regional Forum, which is a security dialogue forum within the ASEAN mechanism, North Korea is a part of it. So if you look at it in another way, then you see that China and India are part of different dialogue partnerships with ASEAN. So as long as there was a stable peace within Southeast Asia and these countries were acceptable to all the other dialogue partners, it was possible to have this type of a mechanism in place. Now, what happens when a trade war emerges between two of its largest trading partners, which is split between different countries? And that's where the idea of weaponized interdependence comes into play. Of course, the more popular understanding, and what David also mentioned in his presentation, is that the idea of complex interdependence and that high level of mutual dependencies will prevent countries from going towards conflict or war has worked in a lot of regions around the world. Where we are is the perfect example of how this type of dependencies develop over a point of time and war becomes unimaginable. But the complex network or the dependencies that are there in Asia, in Southeast Asia and Pacific, are very much different from the reality of what we see in Europe. So when we talk about weaponized interdependence, it is basically the strategic use of interconnectedness which we see, and the reliance between different actors and often states, which gain a coercive advantage over other countries. So within this context, we have several examples to see how the economic advantage, let's say, that China has with Southeast Asian countries is used to coerce at certain points of time. So what are the asymmetrical disadvantages to multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific, right? So what exactly is the current Indo-Pacific? One, of course, we see that it's a largely major power-driven concept, right? It's defined by certain countries, which are large countries, which have certain security perspectives in place. And also security structures and economic structures assume a certain type of cooperation will happen. It should happen minus certain countries. It should have certain countries in place, right? So it's not a completely coercive concept. And it also re-examines a certain system, existing system of multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific. So is it time to then address the elephant in the room? Of course. Till now, we see that if you look at this particular image over here, everything is red. So why is this red? Because even though the Indo-Pacific strives to build an alternative structure to what China has as an advantage in this particular region, we see that all these countries in red depend on China, or China is the largest trading partner of all of them. So how do you build a system which is exclusive of China but still dependent on it, which is the biggest dilemma which most of this understanding faces? So when we look at the contemporary international relations in the Indo-Pacific, where do we look at it right now? One is, of course, there is competitive regionalism, right? So there is the Indo-Pacific conceptualization, and then there is the idea of China and its vision for the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific region. It very openly does not accept this particular term of the Indo-Pacific, dismisses it as an anti-China coalition. This is an official statement. And the increased use of trade as an influencing factor in exercising influence within this region has been growing a lot. Whether it's China using its economic influence, which it has with disputants in the South China Sea. This has happened with the Philippines, for example, where economic might has been used multiple times to make the Philippines amend its ways about confronting China about its security threats in the South China Sea. The use of multilateral financial institutions. So, for example, if you look at whether it's the Asian Development Bank or the Asian AIIB, which is the financial institution of the BRICS countries, you see that several of these decisions also most of the times are dependent on how the diplomatic relations or the geopolitical relations are between these countries. And this often leads to a disrupting regional organizational practice and failure of regional processes. So, for example, intra-ASEAN cooperation has multiple times failed due to this type of an external pressure or the relation which certain countries have with external partners such as China. So we see a disruption in the regional trade order. Started with the US-China trade war and technology competition, where sanctions completely wrecked supply chains. Supply chains diversification led to different type of initiatives and coalition building, which worked over here, and withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership by the United States. United States and India not signing the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the formation of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So here we see that there are certain geopolitical issues based on which regional order has been disrupted. And also the delay and politicization of the RCEP remains one of the major factors for a non-comprehensive regional trade agreement. So the question that I wanted to just leave the audience here is that is ASEAN and Asia-Pacific regionalism relevant in the Indo-Pacific era? And some concluding observations before I wrap up. I would like to say one, of course, is that multilateralism is at an inflection point in the Indo-Pacific. Do we really think about the survival of multilateral institutions within a certain old order? Or are we thinking about an order in which countries which are on either side have to pick sides? The second, the scope of disruptions have now beholden these countries to major power politics. So, for instance, when we look at ASEAN, we see that it needs to choose one side or the other. It's no more central. So that is the reason why this organization was created, so that it doesn't get split between this type of major power politics between countries. And finally, when we look at these interdependent relationships, they require a certain type of a deeper scrutiny to avoid falling into these economic traps of major power competitions. So thank you. That would be it from my side. I can take some questions.
Thank you very much. Vignesh, here in Europe, we suddenly discovered that we used to say the security umbrella from the United States suddenly disappeared. But not only that, the United States started to throw the umbrellas against us. So all this construction that you have made, it's a different situation, but this question of the security umbrellas in this moment is a very tricky one. Would you agree? Yes. Anyway, thank you very much. Now I will give the floor to our colleague and friend Mujib Abid. He is coming from 12 hours distance, probably. Well, in the other side of the, you could have come through, not around. Yes, from Melbourne. And you will speak about the Afghans in the driver's seat, and you will explain us, well, how it can relate 2016 with 2025.
Right.
No. Thank you, Mujib.
Thank
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor and fellow panelists and their organizers. It's been a wonderful time the last 3 days. Yeah, so my paper with the slightly changed title now. I'm looking at the politics of peace processes in Afghanistan, and specifically looking at this one case study, a bit of an exceptional situation where a peace process actually resulted in a peace agreement that was then, broadly speaking, implemented, and the ceasefire and other arrangements within it were more or less honored by the belligerent parties. And there is a purpose behind this endeavor, and that I feel like there are lessons to be learned, as the professor kind of implied, things that we can observe and theorize and think about that might be instructive for the current predicament of Afghanistan. Just want to make sure all the time. Right. So just a bit of a context. Afghanistan, over 4 decades of armed conflict, as you probably are aware of, and despite what image that might invoke, there has always been attempts at a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Peace processes have more or less always paralleled military confrontation. On 3 separate occasions, these peace processes actually led to peace agreements that were implemented, but at the same time, peace agreements that did not quite respond to the needs of Afghan people, and as such establish or manage to deliver a lasting and just peace. And there is one reason for why that is. Each of these agreements, and I've gone on to list them, the 88 Geneva Accords, the 5 December, there should be a 2001 there, Bonn Agreement, and then the 2020 Doha Agreement. They have one quite bizarre feature that they hold in common. They exclude rather willingly one side to the conflict from the terms of the agreements themselves. So in 88, the militant Islamists were not a party to the agreement. Instead, Afghanistan and Pakistan signed the agreements with the guarantors, as you can see there, Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan, supporting each of their satellite states. In 2001, the newly defeated, villainized at the time, perhaps you can build a case that quite rightly so, but the Taliban were excluded from the peace agreement, for which both the Afghan people and the international community paid dearly. And now we know that there were some attempts at overtures from their side. In 2020, as crazy as this might sound, the Afghan government were excluded. So it was an agreement between the Americans and the Taliban. And I guess the 2016 agreement, which is the fourth one, is rather unique in the modern, in the history of conflict in Afghanistan, because it did not necessarily exclude any of the belligerent parties on the one hand. On the other hand, it didn't have a direct involvement of international actors per se. It had to work with and through the constraints and opportunities provided by them. And so the agreement was between Hizb-e-Islami Afghanistan, which is an old political party, an Islamist faction supported by the West in its heyday in the 80s to fight the Soviet Union. And then by the 90s, kind of towards the late 90s, kind of lost its hold on power, was sidelined. But by 2001, when the West came back to Afghanistan, it kind of re-entered the scene. The Hizb-e-Islami of Hekmatyar is the leader of it, and the Afghan government. Now, in the paper, I've gone on to talk more about what's so unique about Hizb-e-Islami and the pantheon of Afghan political actors or political sort of context. I won't bore you too much with that stuff now. But so just a little bit in terms of theorizing what I'm trying to the case that I'm trying to build in here. So the case of in the context of Afghanistan, power, its articulation in many ways could rather easily be construed or presented as coloniality of power. It's not just any power, it's colonialism continuing to embed itself in power arrangement and institutions, and very much define the encounters of Afghans with the outside world. Now, coloniality of power, as Annabelle Quayano would tell us, has a couple of qualities, as does colonialism proper in its heyday as well. But prime amongst it is this demand for assimilation, this desire to erase alterity, this sort of rather forceful attempt at marginalizing other alternative modes of thinking, knowledge perspectives, cosmologies, worldviews, so on and so forth. In Afghanistan after 2001, any talk of peace, any talk of a diplomatic resolution to the conflict would be articulated through the liberal peace worldview or perspective. And that had some contradictions, one of them being that with the signing of this important foundational document, the 2001 Bonn Agreement, there was this claim, rather against a lot of evidence, that Afghanistan lived in a post-conflict society, so we should just deal with it as such, even though there was a war going on, and there was a war going on for 20 years. But we also know that the Afghans themselves, the local allies, illiberal allies to the Western intervention, peace building, state building, and war on terror projects, from different post-colonial, decolonial literature, we know that the local native allies to colonial powers, they occupied this complex place or site of subjecthood, in that they might say one thing but mean something else. they might, articulate or utter their priorities in certain terms, but then in action things could look different. There's a certain performativity to it all, as Frans Fanon would like to remind us. But there's also some good literature on this stuff. So the categories or the sort of representations of Afghan allies and actors from a Western liberal perspective over the last 20 years of war on terror and state building, it's not really as stable, because at their core, they're representations. We like to project a certain image, sort of the American Western, resourceful outsider would like to project a certain image, but those representations aren't that stable, and we can see it time and again in different examples of key political actors. Another literature here coming from constructivist IR traditions that's quite helpful is, this notion of sovereignty in externally governed spaces and how it could be compromised, and how from within these sites and spaces, there's kind of a certain potential and at times will to resist and push back and promote alternative projects. So look, there's many ways we can go about this, and in the paper I go on and on talking about it. But here, just that there are alternative visions and perspectives on what peace is, which Cruz has captured in Pluriversal or Decolonial Peace. And I think this language could be instructive to explain what happened in 2016, but also going into the future. Now, a couple of challenges in terms of, so it wasn't easy to agree to bring the different belligerent parties to an agreement. 2016 agreement took a lot of effort, and the actors had to be committed to overcome a number of deeply embedded cultural, structural challenges. For one, the Americans, after the Obama surge of 2008, 2009, even though they agreed that they would withdraw their troops by 2014, so there was a hard timeline. But at the same time, so that means there should be a need for support for peace process. But they wouldn't quite go all the way. They would say, we believe in reintegration. So the fighters, put down your weapons. We will reward you for that type of cooperation, but no reconciliation. Right? And there's a politics to it all. Reconciliation means that your views and grievances might be legitimate, whereas reintegration is essentially, in a way, put down the arms. It's a form of co-optation and appeasement, right? So the Afghans negotiating or facilitating this peace process had to work with that, and it wasn't easy from talking to them and hearing their perspectives and memories of that period. The other thing is that this militant faction had all types of enmities within political parties and factions and fronts in the country that had all of a sudden been empowered and enabled, and because they were allies to the Western liberal regime or project. So how do you deal with that? And it wasn't just as simple as we have a history. The shape and cityscapes, for example, in Afghanistan, they had now changed. We were lionizing certain figures. There was a certain national narrative that had been internalized within the state and to some extent within the society. There's that photo that's from where I grew up, very close to me. It was a different square, this one in the bottom. It was called the Ministry of Public Health Square when I was growing up. But in 2002, they came and they renamed it. This is square of the national hero, Ahmad Shah Massoud. Ahmad Shah Massoud was the very much had a rivalry that went back to the 70s with Hekmatyar, right? But then on the other hand, the Hizb Islami, in many ways, I suppose their understanding of power also evolved and grew. They believed a lot more since 2003, 2004 in the power of information, misinformation, disinformation, PR campaigns, putting together counter histories and counter narratives, right? And so by 2017, there was a claim that Hekmatyar, the leader of this Islamist faction, had written 118 books, right? And so that's just one example of it there. It's called, I read it for this paper a little closely, but I've been reading this guy's work for years now. It's called Dasais Penhan Chehrahay Uryan, hidden or concealed conspiracies naked faces, something like that. And so in it, you read the book, and he's just going after everybody. But those people are now in Kabul, they're in power, and you have to make peace with them. So very difficult. But there are also opportunities. The facilitators, the High Peace Council of Afghanistan, for one, they were, I think, in many ways, oscillating between pragmatism and a more principled approach. So when it came to pragmatism, you go to talk to Americans to lift the sanctions regimes. You promise them that this peace agreement will help with the implementation of the liberal project, right? You also promise them that this will actually help with bringing Taliban to the peace talks, which is really the main enemy, right? That's the more existential threat. When you go and talk to the enemies or the rivals of Hizb within the current state, you tell them if there is a confrontation down the line with the Taliban, you want these guys on your side, not on their side, right? And again, similar promises. And in the paper, I go on to explain a couple of other things as well. But when the Afghans are in the driver's seat, things look very different. When peace is looked at from this decentered, pluriversal kind of perspective, things look a lot more different. We have more tools that are attuned to the local conditions of Afghanistan. Its geohistorical locatedness. And that seems to have gone a long way towards securing what I'll show you next, that peace agreement. And now that's an annotated draft of the agreement. They shared it with me, some context, but it's interesting to see what they were going back and forth about. And those handwritings are of the president at the time of Afghanistan on the margins of the draft of the agreement. But it's very interesting. And in the paper, I go on to read very closely what the agreement was actually all about. So it's really some solid concessions from the Afghan government. And to their credit, they managed to deliver on a lot of that. But when it comes to the demands from the militant faction who had been fighting the regime and fighting the Western troops for 16 years at that point, release the prisoners, respect and come to our side by respecting and acknowledging the legality of the 2004 Constitution. And in the meantime, let go of this insistence on foreign troops withdrawal from the country. But the one issue that seems to be more important than anything else is work with us side by side to cut some type of a peace deal with the Taliban. All right. So, and then the other two documents are certain decrees by the president that it essentially implements the peace agreement. Just to conclude, we have to rethink peace, and we have to rethink it from the perspective of Global South, especially if we are to deliver peace in locales in the Global South. Peace is not there's no fixed sort of silver bullet that can deliver us peace in these contexts. Rather, peace and the processes involved, they're contested, they're plural, they are inherently political projects. But also, and this is very much a core principle of decolonial thinking, tension is something that we should be in political processes and entanglements and encounters. Tension is something that we have to be at peace with, I suppose. That we shouldn't always try to resolve difference, but that we can coexist. Different worlds, different perspectives, different epistemological frameworks can coexist. The binaries, especially the liberal binaries after the 1990s sort of post-Cold War self-congratulatory moment, and these binaries, the way that they would crystallize. So state, non-state actor, peace, violence, legitimate, illegitimate actors. You don't always need to have a clear-cut, predefined understanding of what these are. There is reprieve, there's promise, intention. And I think the Afghans, in their own way, limited as they were by the imposition of certain institutionalized liberal sensibilities, they kind of delivered on that. The 2016 peace agreement and peace process succeeded because it was not exclusively imitating a Western model. And indeed, that had failed anyways. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much. May I ask you, Mujib, you are coming from Melbourne, but you initially you were from there. My point is, have you ever been in Afghanistan?
Oh yeah, I grew up in Afghanistan.
You grew up in
I
Afghanistan.
lived there, I grew up
No,
there, yeah.
good. That was my question. Thank you. Thank you. Well, this is one of those awkward situations in which in academic congress we have time to discuss. I never saw this in my life, my entire life. We always finish after the hour, the presentations, never before. Of course, if the other participants should be with us, that it would happen, but they didn't come, so we have time to discuss. So please, I give you the possibility to intervene. If you want to make, please name the speaker you want to contest or ask something about. Thank you. And tell your name.
Thank you. It was a really fruitful panel. We learned a lot again. Taner Zobar from Middle East Technical University, Ankara. My question will be, first question to Vignesh Ram and the second to Mujib. The geopolitics in Indo-Pacific, or that is the problem, like how can you call it? The external powers, they have a lot of to do there. Okay, so what about the Chinese road and belt and road issue? Could you elaborate on this from your perspective of the geopolitics? And to Mujib, this is the second time that an Islamic government in Afghanistan is established. And that this time, the second time, they seem to be more ready, because it took very short time to adapt themselves to run a government. But yet, in case of especially the geopolitical position of Afghanistan, in the sense of the human trafficking, armed trafficking, and the what you call other things, other illegal things, right? So, could you elaborate on this? Thank you.
As we are full, I think that we can skip immediately to the answers. So, beginning with you.
Sure. Thank you, Fernando. Look, so this is what I say to a lot of my Australian friends. And I was actually recently interviewed on our national radio SBS there. Because a lot of Australians, young people, they go to Afghanistan. And I was like, Afghanistan probably has never been this safe since the late 1970s for traveling. So in that naked kind of material sense, there is security. And that's because the state can impose itself. It can discipline, right? That's something that comes to a revolutionary state like this quite naturally. So, when you're talking about drugs, smuggling of illicit materials, goods, weapons, it only, if it happens, or places where it does happen, it's sanctioned by the state. And there are probably internal reasons and logics behind it, right? I mean, it's very much marginalized, it's very much an isolated government, and the economy is suffering, but in some ways it's also stable because of it. I think I don't want to reframe your question, but this is more me. I think what really bothers me right now in post-2021 Afghanistan, under the control of the Taliban, is the way that violence is cultural, right? It's in the thinking of the people behind the institution. It's the rigidity of the ideological projects that they're put together. It's a contradictory ideological project. So it's not very neat. It's not very clean. I think they're also confused about it at times. And there are factions and interfactional and internal dynamics within the movement. But it's more that type of violence, and it's not going to bode well. So it's already, it's terrible for Afghan women, as you all know, right? We're all following it and we're all hurt over it. But it's not just the Afghan women, it's the minorities, it's the young people, it's the civil society activists, it's journalists who are all being controlled and disciplined and policed. So in a roundabout way of saying, you're right, that is a problem. We should be concerned, especially in a geopolitical sense. But for me, what really bothers me is it's the structural and the cultural, not necessarily the direct violence. And that's and that's going to be there, I think, for a while, unless we figure out a way to come to terms and cut some type of an agreement where more and more of Afghan political elite are included within the state institutions.
Okay, Vignesh, please.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, like in one of my slides, I conclude with the idea that now it's a time. It's at a turning point when we look at the Indo-Pacific or the construct of the Indo-Pacific as a concept. One is either you pick sides, the United States-based structure, which has been there for a very long period of time, or you go with the China. And one of the biggest infrastructure development push in this particular region has been the BRI, right, the Belt and Road Initiative, of which a large portion of the investments have gone into Southeast Asia, into ASEAN countries. Like, for example, most recent was the inauguration of a high-speed rail in Indonesia, right? And I've traveled multiple times in that region for research work and for conferences and others. We are astounded the amount of investment which has gone in on the ground, right? So, for example, you look at a country like Laos, right, landlocked country, one of the poorest countries in the world. It has a high-speed rail which runs through from the border with China up till the border with Thailand, right? You can reach in like 3.5 hours. So I don't know. I can say even in India, we've been building a high-speed rail. It's taking time, but China's already built it in Laos, right? So that is the type of investment which is going in. And but it does also come with certain problems. So if you look at, for example, in a country like Sri Lanka, where as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, China invested in a port in the south of the country known as Hambantota. Right, so it does Sri Lanka is unable to pay back the debt. So it's been leased for about 99 years to a Chinese company, a state-owned company. So you can then follow the cues as to what exactly happens, right? So every single time these type of facilities are also dual-use facilities, right? So it may be commercial, but a Chinese vessel will come and dock there. And Sri Lanka is hardly any distance from India, right? If you look at it geographically. So there are geopolitical connotations to most of these type of investments also. I'm not saying other countries don't do it, they don't have it in their mind. But if you look at it in the sense of competition and geopolitics, then definitely these investments which China is making through the Belt and Road Initiative has a long-term perspective of this type of a competition within that.
Okay, second round. Okay, I have a curiosity, or really two. When it's not a curiosity, it's a constatation. Both with you, Vignesh. the definition of the Indo-Pacific, let's say the bigger, the greater lines, of course, we see three interesting things. The one is they exclude China and Pakistan. And on the other side, they include Madagascar and Mauritius. That's interesting. But this is a constatation. I can understand that on the geopolitical side of the reasoning. My second point is, well, a curiosity, because when you put the map of the China influence all around the place, the big red, you included Spain and Portugal into this big red and excluded the rest of Europe. That I don't understand. That's my question. Is it a flaw, or can you elaborate?
I mean, the second part of your question was a little unclear for me.
The first part, it was, it's not a question.
Yeah, if you can just elaborate the second part again, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I just lost that.
Can you show us I don't know whether you can show us the map of the China influence. It will be easier.
I have the map of the Indo-Pacific in my presentation.
No, the red one.
Oh, okay.
The red map.
I can do that. Just give me a moment. This one? Yeah. This is about China's trading relationship. Okay, I think I have to share the screen. Just give me a moment.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Look, you see that you have Africa, almost Southwest Asia, Middle East, as we call it. And within Europe, you have the Iberian Peninsula. Do you see it?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right over here. Yeah. So this map actually explains the trade dependencies, right?
It is from Visual Capitalist. Okay, I use the Visual Capitalist also. I have not seen that.
I cropped it to
That's not right.
Pacific.
That's not right. Spain and Portugal have, of course, they have huge trade with China, but all European countries have. And some of the European countries more than Spain and Portugal.
Yeah, this defines the largest trading partners actually. It's either US or China. The one in blue, the US is the largest trading partner. The red is China. So that is what this map depicts. And since I was using the ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific, so probably that part of the map is just a little out. So it just defines this particular dynamic within this framework.
It was only a curiosity because,
yes.
Okay.
I think there is a question in the...
Yes, of course. Please.
Or an observation. I'm not sure about that.
Does somebody want to not only contest, but yes, please.
What was the presentation?
Yeah. This one. Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
How do I exit it? Just trying.
You don't have?
Yeah.
If you don't have, I believe that we should thank our speakers and applaud them and declare the end of this session.
Question.
It's okay? Thank you.
Okay.